Happy New Year to you all. Welcome to 2017, Titans fans. You are listening to the Two-Tone Crew, the official podcast of TitansReport.com, and we are here tonight to wrap up the 2016 NFL season for the Tennessee Titans and talk about what's ahead in 2017. So, Jamal, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, John. Nice to be back.
And Scotty is back with us once again as well to wrap up this season.
What's up?
Well, we actually missed a week, guys, because of several different circumstances. We didn't do a show last week.
The Titans took a week off, so did we.
Indeed. Season did not end the way many of us wanted it to. In fact, the last time that we did a podcast, everything was still on the line. And then, of course, we all know now the Titans lost to the Jags. And so we thought, well, we can't do a podcast before we wait and see what happens in the Texans game. And then Mariota went down with the injury. Texans ended up winning. Then it was Christmas Day, and podcast never happened. But here we are to talk about that game, to talk about today's game, and really just wrap up this 2016 season for the Titans and talk about what we're expecting in 2017. So obviously that Jags game ended up being huge, and despite the fact that there's going to be a lot of good about this year, there's going to be a sour taste in our mouth all off season, and some of the players even alluded to it today after the Texans game in their post-game comments. We finished with a 9-7 record, and what's crazy is that Jacksonville game was really the difference. And you look, I think it's eerie how the Texans were in an almost the exact same scenario. I think we were down by the same amount of points. They were down to the Jags the week before, and then we were down to the Jags last week. And they came back and won the game, and the Titans didn't. And both of us finished with 9-7 records, yet they're going to the playoffs. They're the AFC South champs based on division record. So, I mean, I know we've kind of had some time to let that emotion go away, but obviously you guys, I think, were very disappointed with how that Jags game went down. And it was a game that it wasn't even so much that they got beat. It's just that they were absolutely destroyed pretty much in all phases of the game. Mariota did not look great. The defense was just terrible the whole game. Some iffy coaching moves, especially early, and ended up just a dominating performance by the Jags. And then to make it even worse, you have Mariota go down with a broken ankle, and the Titans, that's going to hover over them all offseason. So, I mean, like I said, we don't need to completely rehash it, but Jamal, I know you had to be pretty disappointed with the way that went down, considering just how close we actually ended up being.
Yeah.
One way of putting it.
It was a game that made me nervous before the game. I think I said that, and I think, it was a classic trap game, and the Jags had been playing much better than their record for much of the year, and they had a lot of added motivation against us. It was extremely disappointing, and then, I mean, it was one thing when we were losing, and it was just like, oh, come on, we can't do this, we got to come back. But when Mariota went out, it was just like the sickest feeling I've had in a long time watching a Titans game, because for a long time there wasn't even like what's on the line, nothing, but like this, it was just like, not only now did we miss the playoffs this year in what felt like a gimme towards the end of the year, now it's like next year is kind of impacted, because how long's the recovery going to be? Is he going to be back? It was the sickest I've felt with a Titans game in a long time. Especially just because it was yet another division game that it's like, why can't we beat anyone outside the division? And just like our division gives us trouble, and they're not good teams. It's frustrating.
Scotty, what about you? What do you think happened with with just the team coming out so flat? I mean, do you think it was because I don't know, they hadn't been in a position like this in so long? Were they just so uptight, or was it just, I don't know, it was just one of those things? Because earlier in the year, we basically did the same thing to the Jags that they just did to us.
I think it was a combination, like Jamal said. Everyone said it was a trap game, and for all the reasons a trap game's a trap game, it was a trap game. the Titans were coming off the huge Kansas City game. The Jaguars fired their coach and got that one game bounce that teams get so often. And hey, the Jags have a lot of talent, and that talent was on display. And, the defense in Mariota had one of their worst games.
Yeah.
It all combined for a loss. And the disappointing thing is the game today would have been so huge.
Oh, man. Yeah.
And we never got the chance. Instead, we got a, preseason game, basically.
Yeah. It was quite a roller coaster. I mean, to come down off the high that we had from Kansas City, hitting that big-time game-winning field goal and being in a fantastic position. And I mean, I was fully planning on going today to the Texans game had everything been on the line. And I was really anxious to see what Nissan Stadium was going to look like. Was the magic going to return, the back to the days of the Coliseum, when they first moved to Tennessee, and every game, felt like a playoff game early on because the way the fans came out and supported the team. And I was really anxious to see if that was going to come back, because essentially it would have been the playoffs starting a week early for the Titans, and everything would have been on the line. And then, like Jamal said, when Mariota went down, it really kind of, even if they came back at that point, you're thinking, oh man, I mean, even if I still wanted to win, obviously, and I still wanted to get into the playoffs. But at that point, you're thinking without Mariota, it's like, what's the point? And now here we're seeing, it's kind of crazy what's happening in the AFC now. You look at the Texans quarterback situation, you look at the Raiders quarterback situation, and all of a sudden these injuries are just starting to pile up here. Texans are, I think it's pretty much confirmed now, right? They will be playing the Raiders. That's a winnable game for them with the defense they have. I mean, they've got the number one defense in the NFL. You'd really like to see the Titans, even if it hadn't been with Mariota, you'd like to see them there in that position. But unfortunately, it was all for naught. And like I said, it just, that Jags game, who would have thought that it was really the difference. Texans were able to beat the Jags after being down, and we weren't.
I mean, seeing who Houston is going to play in the first round makes it that much more miserable that we didn't get that game, because that would be quite likely a win, especially if Mariota was there. But even on top of that, we played Oakland earlier in the year. It would have been nice to get a rematch, even if both quarterbacks were there. It's really a missed opportunity. That was a very winnable game, and we had discussed numerous times how if we do make the playoffs, we have a better winning formula for the playoffs, maybe even than the regular season. So, yeah, I mean, it's just complete letdown. Houston is probably going to win a game in the playoffs. They're going to be favored in that game at least. That's ridiculous.
They might, but they're by no means a guaranteed win in the playoffs. I mean, they're terrible with their quarterback situation. I don't think Texan fans are happy they're in the playoffs. I doubt they could care less. And I wanted to make the playoffs, but honestly, without Mariota, I'd be happy we're in the playoffs, but I wouldn't be nearly as excited.
No, yeah, I agree. And what's funny is you talked about how wanting to see what Nissan Stadium was like if we made the playoffs and stuff.
Yeah.
I have not seen like a sharper contrast, like how quickly people lost interest. It went from like the fan base was growing, people were eating up all Titans news, to like just dead. Like, I don't care.
Yeah, that's how it goes.
I will say this. I'm a junkie, so I might not be a good example. But I started watching the 49er-Rams game after that. And I suddenly, the Rams game obviously had a big impact on the Titans draft position. And
right.
I already found myself looking forward to the draft and stuff. And
I was
rooting for that Rams game almost as much as the Titans games at that point.
Scotty, I think your post nailed it when you said the Titans won the popular vote, but they lost the Electoral College.
I thought that was great. I did.
No, I mean, you look at all the statistical, aside from the Texans having, I'm pretty sure they still have the number one defense. Aside from that, I mean, the Titans pretty much destroy them in many categories.
Everyone wanted to see the Titans in the playoffs. The Titans were an entertaining team.
Right.
They made big plays. They ran the ball. They played smash mouth, and they were at least excited. The Texans are. I mean, that's the total opposite of exciting.
Well, and it's funny because you said their fans probably don't even want to be in the playoffs right now because I'm sure their fans are looking at it and say we have no chance. Even if we made the playoffs without Marcus Mariota, we would have been that much more excited because we've been down for a while. It's like your expectations completely change.
I was going to say that same thing, and they've been disappointed in the playoffs for so many seasons in a row that they're already like, here we go again. Who cares about this?
And now there's this report from Jay Glazer today that says Bill O'Brien could be one of the surprise coaches to move on, and it was kind of unclear if it would be more of his decision or more of the Texans, but that's something to watch. I would be shocked if that happened. And Glazer's very connected. It seemed clear he was speculating, but I don't think he'd put that out there unless he had heard something. So that kind of really surprised me. Unless, maybe O'Brien just did not really like the way they handled the whole Osweiler situation. It was reported that he didn't even meet with Osweiler before they signed him. So there's some weird stuff going on there, but how insane would it be if they win a playoff game and then still part ways with a coach at the end of the year? I just can't see it, but with Jay Glazer putting it out there, I think it's at least something to keep an eye on.
The Broncos did it with John Fox 2 years ago.
Yeah. Yep.
Theirs was at least more reasonable because they felt like they were maybe a coach away from getting over the top. Houston, it's like, what do you think you're going to do?
Gary Kubiak.
Well, O'Brien's.
Let him.
Yeah, exactly. Also, some rumblings around the Colts situation, and perhaps they'll get rid of their GM and keep Pagano. Everybody's saying, please keep Pagano, but I'm like, I don't know. The guy's been beating us pretty handily since he's been there. So
he still went 8-8 this year. Their team is devoid of talent. They have to get rid of Grigson, their GM. They have to. And then I don't know that anybody really wants Pagano to stay around within Indianapolis, but maybe you give their GM time to establish himself and then pick his own guy next year.
Yeah, they should have never extended those two guys last year. That was their mistake.
Oh yeah, that was. And then the Jags, of course, already looking for a new head coach. So lots of changes in the AFC South outside of the Titans. So
you think Marrone has any real shot at that team?
Well, I did until they completely collapsed today.
Weren't they up like 17-0 or something?
Yes.
I think they were, yeah. And then the Colts got a field goal. Jags missed a field goal. And
luck things and
screwed the Titans once more.
He's got a chance because there's so many openings now. There's not going to be enough big-name head coaches to fill all these spots.
Well, there's no Mike Mularkey out this year. But,
yeah, there probably is. And
yeah, there's probably a couple of guys who failed in multiple spots.
And those are the guys you want. I'm not kidding.
No, you actually said that when Mike Mularkey was hired. You guys heard it. I was listening to the original podcast a little bit before this one just to see what all of our takes were when Mike Mularkey was hired. And you said at the time, and I think, John, you quoted a stat that somebody had done a study and guys on their second job are the most likely to be successful. And Scotty, you were transitioning that to just say anybody with experience who's had that job before.
Yeah.
It makes them more credible because it's a totally different type of job and you don't want somebody learning on the job.
Munchak was getting better when he got fired. He was a much better coach the year he got fired than the first year he was. If he got hired as a head coach now, I have no doubt he'd be a much better head coach.
And I do think there's something to be said for the fact that no Super Bowl winning coach has ever done it with another team. You can just look back at history. It's kind of crazy that it hasn't happened. And I'm sure part of it's been just bad luck, but there's definitely something to that. So, yeah, this game today, I don't know that we need to spend much time discussing it. The Titans, Mike Mularkey talked about wanting to come out and win the game. They came out. Defense, I think we were actually discussing that before we went live and started recording, but defense played well. They got a defensive score today, which was the first time all year, forced some turnovers. And, they ran the ball, and Castle was not great, but did just enough, and they won the game. Clearly, the Texans weren't going all out. Clowney and some other of their top guys were resting. Offensively, they did play savage, and for some reason, Bill O'Brien decided to run a 4th and 1 quarterback sneak, and he got taken out with a concussion. It looked like he was coming back in, but then they said no. So I don't know. That's just a crazy situation. I can't imagine doing that with my starting quarterback in a meaningless game. But so yeah, I mean, this game, clearly the players, it meant something to them to finish 9-7, and as much as you want draft position, I do think there's something to be said for finishing the year with a winning season. I mean, 9-7, to me at least, is drastically different from 8-8. And we talked about, I think you, Jamal, we were kind of comparing this to, well, how is this different from the Munchak 9-7 team, which started off pretty hot and then kind of fell apart near the end. This team was a little bit of the opposite. One of you was about to jump in there.
Go ahead, Jamal.
I kind of lost my train of thought on it. I was going to talk about.
I just kept talking and you lost.
Yeah, well, that happens frequently, but go ahead, Scotty.
Well, this season, Mariota stepped up and started looking like an elite quarterback, and he's 23 years old.
Yeah.
Back in 2011, we didn't know what we had in Jake Locker. We found out it was bad news. So this looks more like the beginning of what could be a long stretch of good seasons. So, and I wanted them to actually lose the game today just for draft position. But as I watched the game, I couldn't help but root for them to win the game.
So I think we would have had 4 spots better if we had lost this game. I think I'm reading this right. So we would have been pick 14 instead of pick 18. That's meaningful because there's probably a guy who they're hoping is going to fall, and he could go reasonably in those 4 picks. But I kind of am with what John Boy was saying, which is I wanted us to win this game because one of the biggest things, I think that one of the most positive things that Mike Mularkey has done is he seems to really be making strides in the mentality of the locker room. And we've talked about, I think for years on this podcast, how there just seems to have been historically something off with the effort, the consistency, just that winning mentality. And it's not a definable, tangible thing, but I think it's very much legitimate. When you expect to win, it's different. And so I think for them to get to a winning record is meaningful going forward.
Yeah. There's a couple of threads to point out. I agree with that, Jamal. On Titans Report, we had I posted one and Jamal posted one. I brought it back up to the top of the page over on Titans Report. But we all voted in some preseason polls, season predictions, both in basic things like record, and then some of the more nuanced things like how many yards are certain players going to finish with. And some really interesting stuff to look through in there if you're interested. And we don't have time on a podcast to go over all of it. For the most part, I think people were pretty spot on. The big one a lot of people missed on was Mariota starting all 16 games, which we just missed. And then the other big one that people missed on is the wide receiver, Sharp, Matthews, and then Delanie Walker. We consider him in there as well. So Walker and Matthews actually finished with the same number of catches. I think it was 65. And Matthews finished way more yards and more touchdowns. And then Sharp was nowhere near what many of us were predicting. But I think for me, as we kind of shift gears a little bit and move into just our season in review here, Rashard Matthews was really a big part of the offense kind of waking up and becoming a much better offense than what we saw in those first couple games. And Jason Wolf had an article this week about how Matthews wasn't too happy at being splitting time with Andre Johnson. And evidently he voiced that with the coaches, and who knows, maybe they saw as well that he was coming along and Johnson wasn't performing very well. But after Andre retired, Matthews really stepped up his game. He had another huge game today and caught a deep pass today and caught the touchdown pass today. So for me, he was definitely exceeded my expectations and showed the makings of being a very good number 2 wide receiver. And maybe if you have the right players around him, even a serviceable 1 receiver. But what about you guys? I mean, what surprised you kind of taking a step back I don't know if you've had time yet to go back through and look at all those predictions and kind of see where things ended up, but anything that really surprised you about the year?
What surprised me was how good DeMarco Murray was.
Mhm.
In the preseason, everyone thought Derrick Henry he had a great preseason. He looked so good. And people kind of overlooked, including myself, how Murray also looked good in the preseason, but I think people are excited. But, hey, it can't be understated how good Murray was this season. Catching, blocking, running. I mean, he slowed down when he had the foot injury, and after the bye, he came back a little bit. But overall,
he was third in receptions too, so he was a huge part of the passing.
He wasn't just catching screens and stuff. He's a downfield, pass catching option. I think
much more smooth than most backs.
He had 66 targets going into today. I mean, he was a huge. He's one of my concerns about. He could easily break down at any time, and he's going to be hard to replace.
Yeah, especially early in the season. I think his second half of the season is a little easier to replace just because of his decrease in rushing production. But the passing game will be different. You don't often find a back as smooth as he is in the passing game. He would have been my biggest surprise. And in terms of the predictions was where I was off the most. I thought Derrick Henry might take over as the season started going. And nowhere close. I mean, Murray, I would honestly consider Murray maybe even more of a team MVP than Marcus Mariota. But I tend to look at MVP differently because I don't rate quarterbacks as high as most people do. But, I mean, he was the engine of our offense, and he was completely dominant.
Yeah, I could agree that he can be considered the team MVP for what he did. I mean, obviously the quarterback's more important, but just for what he did, I mean, that's pretty special season, really, from any running back.
No doubt he was the first half MVP. I mean, that's not really debatable there.
Yeah, I was looking at it earlier because we were having some discussions about after news came out that he had a more serious injury. He disclosed that he had it. He averaged 4.7 yards a carry in the first half of the season and just 4 yards a carry in the second half of the season. And maybe interesting only to me, but Derrick Henry averaged 4.2 yards a carry in the first half of the season and 4.7 in the second half. But as we discussed, Murray was so much better or so much more than just a runner. And that's where I think fans in general struggle with it, especially because there's been a big push of Alabama fans talking about Henry all year. But it's where the analysis gets a little muddy of how much should Henry have played. Well, it kind of depends on how you rate the passing game importance.
They base their offense off a lot of play action, deep passing stuff, and Murray is perfect in that role for picking up blitzes and pass blocking and stuff. And if you have somebody back there, which Henry struggled with, that gives up pressure right there, it's going to totally mess up the big play passing game.
Yeah, it definitely could. I kind of feel like looking forward, I would expect that Murray won't be as good next year. I mean, this year he was awesome.
Yeah, I think,
I think that as he gets older and older, it's just less and less likely that he'll have. I mean, early in the year, he just had so many pop plays where it was just like he's popping out on the film, and it's just impressive. But I think overall, we shouldn't see too much of a drop if. And I don't know enough about Derrick Henry's history or attitude or anything else, but I think as a running back, he's qualified and he has good enough build that he should be able to work on his pass blocking and really be less of a detriment there next year. And I think he'll be a much more rounded back next year. So I'm not as afraid there as I am maybe more at tight end with Delanie Walker. I don't know how many more years he has either.
Yeah,
I think Henry has the kind of skill set where he can improve on his blocking and pass catching and stuff. And he may not get to as good as where Murray was this year, but he can probably be serviceable.
Yeah, and to be clear, I mean, it's amazing how context is everything. Because if you'd said before the season, Titans are going to finish 9-7, tied for the division lead. They'll beat the Texans. They'll beat the Chiefs. They'll beat the Packers. They'll beat the Broncos. We would have all said, yes, sir, absolutely. I will take that season well ahead of schedule in the Mike Mularkey, John Robinson rebuild. But then when you actually get in the season and see how it all broke down here at the end, it's frustrating. But overall, and I think especially the national reaction to the Titans that I've seen is that this is absolutely a team on the rise and that they're well ahead of schedule. I mean, Scotty, you talked all year about Vegas and how wrong they were going to be about the Titans. And what was it, 5.5 games?
Anywhere from 5.5 to 6. I saw it at different
that
books.
They were saying the Titans would win. Yeah. So, I mean, nationally, and I think once we're a little further removed from this, we'll be able to see just how good of a season it actually was. Especially, I mean, that stretch that they went on there. Man, I mean, you talk about beating the Bears, which that was a game that they really controlled and then kind of let get away near the end. But you beat the Bears, then you beat the Broncos, the defending champs, and then you have, as we've said numerous times now, the best win we've had in years against the Chiefs, a clear playoff team, a team that at the time was at full strength, which when you look back on a lot of our wins, that wasn't always the case this year. But that Chiefs win is as good of a win that you'll be able to find. And today they actually won their division. So Chiefs are going to be a team that could go far in the playoffs. So that win was huge and immense, which of course that's what makes the loss the next week all the more painful. But this really was when you consider the development of Mariota, the improvements that John Robinson was able to make in one off season on the offensive line and with the running game. I mean, guys, it's real easy to forget that Antonio Andrews was our lead back for most of the year last year. And
well, even going back to preseason last year, they were still expecting Sankey to be the guy. I mean,
yeah,
talk about disgusting. I mean, we had a total overhaul of our wide receiver core and our running back group. Ended up with a bunch more linemen this year. He overhauled a lot.
Three new starting offensive linemen if you don't count Warmack.
Well, and not only that, but I mean, left guard, he's kind of new too. Spain. I mean, he's played a little bit before, but he didn't start the year last year.
Yeah, and Klein was another move Robinson made to bring him in. Of course, we know about him drafting Conklin. So yeah, I mean, it was a season that obviously we're never going to get that bad taste out of your mouth at the end, but it was absolutely. I think we would all three here consider that season a success in terms of a long-term rebuild of a team, especially when you look. You already talked about Mariota, Scotty, when you consider how young he is and if he's able to continue on this trajectory. Look at that offensive line, though, how young those guys are. I mean, this is technically setting up for a situation to where these guys can stay together for 10 years. I mean, this is a really good setup, especially on the offensive side of the ball when you look at what we've got up front, Mariota. And then, obviously, we already talked about Henry, if he's able to develop. And wide receiver, Matthews is not that old either. And then Sharp, we'll get into more of that as we go here, kind of what we're looking at in the offseason. Then defensively, that one's a little more shaky because you got some guys who are getting up there in age a little bit. You look at our best defensive players this year, Arakpo, Morgan. I mean, they're veterans who probably have years left, but those guys, when they start to hit 30, you just never know how fast they're going to go downhill. So they definitely need an infusion of youth on the defensive side. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to speak for you guys. You obviously have to feel this was a successful season, considering where we were at this time last year.
I think just for Mariota alone, I know he kind of slowed down at the end he played some hard defenses, but the stretch he had and what the improvement he made on his weaknesses, I mean, there's no doubt that he's going to be a very good quarterback for a long time. And he's going to get better. I mean, I just don't see how he won't get better considering how much better he's already gotten.
Yeah, the deep ball thing, I don't think any of us saw that coming. I never thought it was as bad as people seem to think, but I never expected it to be. I mean, it was a strength this year. It wasn't just, he's serviceable at the deep ball. He and Matthews kind of developed there middle of the season. I don't know that anybody really saw that coming.
Yeah, the end of his year, even before injury, was concerning because it was a major step back. But like Scotty said, defenses were much tougher at that point. One of the interesting things is, and one of the reasons why we're picked number 18 instead of further up, is because we lose tiebreakers on strength of schedule. And it's interesting because we did have a really weak schedule. And like you said before, we played a lot of teams when they had injury issues. But if you look at the teams that made the playoffs that we played,
crazy.
We have an amazing record against them. And that's another way that this is different potentially from the Mike Munchak 9-7. I'd have to really go back and compare them. But I seem to recall that we beat bad teams and lost to like every good team with Munchak.
We beat the Ravens. We beat the Ravens that year. They had a winning record.
That was our best win that year.
They beat the Broncos, who were 8-8, and that was their next best win.
Yeah, see, and we've got better wins than that. In terms of playoff teams, well, I guess we beat Houston now too.
Right.
Let me pull that up while you guys talk, and I can run through the playoff teams.
I think it's 5 teams. Yeah, we beat the Dolphins early on. We beat the Lions early on. We beat the Packers, who they're in the playoffs now for sure.
Chiefs,
regardless of if they win. Yeah, and then the Chiefs.
Yeah, I think the only playoff team that we played and did not beat is Oakland.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Because it looks like Green Bay and Detroit are now in the playoffs. And so we beat both of those teams. So we beat 1-2. We beat Kansas City, that's 3. Houston, that's 4. And Miami, that's 5. We beat 5 teams that are in the playoffs. We only played 6 of them. I mean, that's a really positive sign for this team going forward, I think.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure several points of the podcast I kept talking about, if we could just beat the bad teams, you can get to 8-8. And well, we got to 9-7 and didn't quite go the way I was envisioning there. But yeah, I mean, that's a positive sign that we were able to beat such good teams as well.
It's such a week-to-week league that, I mean, the Vikings at the time we played them seemed like a good team.
Oh, yeah, they started really hot.
I don't even care if it's a playoff team or not. When they got on the roll after their 1-3 start, I mean, the bottom line is they're playing very good. I don't care who the opponents were. And, they were scoring. I think once they got to the end of the season and played the Broncos and Chiefs, their game plan changed. They played in bad weather and stuff. And I also think probably changing to more of a running offense against those teams probably got Mariota out of his rhythm a little bit. I don't think he never got it back after that. And plus, I mean, all 4 teams at the end had very good pass defenses.
And let's be fair, I mean, despite the lackluster numbers, the one thing that gives me, well, I guess I would say I don't knock him as much for the bad numbers as in those games is how he finished that Chiefs game. The drive to get the touchdown and then the drive to come back and get in position to get the field goal. I mean, those were Tom Brady-esque type of drives right there where he just took over near the end of that game. And that 4th down pass to Murray, still, I can still see it in my head down there right at the goal line on the sideline, was just another incredible example of how much he did improve this year. So, yeah, I mean, it's all in all, you look back on this season and hopefully 5 years from now, we look back and say that this was the start of something very special here. And lots of numbers to look back on and break down, which I'm sure we'll be doing a lot of that on Titans Report throughout the off season here. But as you kind of already alluded to, Scotty, now I think most people are kind of already turning their minds to the draft and to free agency and trying to figure out how we can make another similar leap to what they did this season, where John Robinson took the offensive line, took the running game, overhauled it, took the wide receiving group, overhauled it. And what can he do like that this year for the defense? Because I did a little end of year post and talked about how us hardcore fans will debate about the offensive changes and what they might do differently. But I think most of the national focus and more of the casual fans, everybody's going to be focused on how do we improve this defense? Because especially down the stretch, I mean, it became very clear that we're going to have to improve the secondary, and it'd be nice to improve the pass rush without having to blitz so often. So as we kind of shift gears a little bit, the Titans have pick number 5. Thank you, Jeff Fisher and the Rams, for that. And also pick number 18. So we're going to be able to get a very, very good player there at number 5. And we'll be doing way more draft shows as we go forward. But just early on here, what are your kind of general thoughts, guys, on the draft, especially with that number 5 pick? I mean, I think in my mind, I think you just got to go with the best defensive player there, regardless of position. You can never use too many pass rushers. Obviously, we need cornerback. We could use a safety if we feel he's a game changer. We could use a defensive lineman if we feel he's a game changer. So I don't think you really want to lock yourself into a spot there, and at least in terms of position. I think you just take a defensive playmaker.
Real fast, they also have endless amounts of cap space. I was just going to throw that in there too.
And that's before we even make a decision on McCourty, who's our highest paid player.
I tend to really struggle with getting into the draft this early, simply because free agency is going to change our draft needs so much.
Yeah. Yep.
That people will spend time talking about we need this XYZ wide receiver, and then we're going to go sign one of these free agents. And then wide receiver gets moved down the list of needs, and we take one in the 4th round or something. So I struggle getting into that sort of stuff, and I haven't even really thought about it too much. Definitely,
when you're talking about top 5, though, I mean that one.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't you think even if who they sign at number 5, you just got to go BPA, somebody who's, because with you, hopefully, and there aren't really any premier quarterbacks, at least in my eyes, but this time last year I hadn't really heard of Carson Wentz either. So hopefully there are going to be some quarterbacks there that slip into the top 5, which is going to cause one of these top defensive guys to be there.
Well, but I mean, when you're saying BPA, a tackle could fall and he'd be worth it there, There's defensive some caveats of things you're going to set aside, but defensively, I think I would love to see a draft finally be heavily slanted towards the defense.
Yeah.
There's already 3 or 4 guys at the top of the draft that are defensive players, and they're definitely going to get one of those guys. I don't care who they sign in free agency. I mean, the Myles Garrett from A&M, the Von Miller type, and the tackle from Alabama, Jonathan Allen, the linebacker from they're going to get one of those guys, and he's going to be a huge impact player, most likely, unless he's a bust. So,
like they have but we'll get excited for a while at least.
Yeah, they're going to be able to get one of those guys.
Man, we're so close to having pick number 4 too.
You don't go 9 and 7 and still get one of those guys most of the time.
Yeah,
it's interesting. I saw, I think Paul Kuharski, somebody put out a sort of a review of our draft last year. Now that we've played a season, and it's like you can't really grade that draft without including the players we're going to get this year from trading out. It's meaningful,
right?
Oh, it's huge.
And I don't think have we figured out yet? I guess we don't really know what 3rd rounder we're going to have until we see about the Rams comp pick, because if they do get a comp pick, which they probably will, then the extra 3rd rounder we get from them will be it'll be that comp pick. So remember, we don't have a 2nd rounder. It's locked that we're going to be picking at 5 and number 18 right now, pending, of course, trades, which that's something that people are already starting to float out there as well, the possibility of the Titans trading down from number 5. Right now, I can't see it. As we get closer to the draft, like Jamal said, after free agency, maybe they would consider it. But, man, I don't know. When you're talking top 5, given the needs that we have, and given that this seems to be a defensive draft, I'd be shocked if they traded it.
No, I don't think. They were in a...
Go ahead.
They were in a unique situation in the top where there was teams wanting a quarterback. At 5, you're not. Yeah, at 5, you're not going to have. There's already talk a couple of quarterbacks could go in the top 5 already, but if they do it.
Man, I hope so.
I do too, and the running back too.
Which quarterbacks were taken last year really high? It was
Goff and
Wentz and
Wentz.
Goff. Was their
Goff.
third?
Say
Well,
that
Goff
again?
was number 1 overall.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Goff and Wentz went number 2.
Winston's number 2.
Yeah,
Yeah, they
but was
traded
there a
up
third
as
one?
well.
No,
Well,
Yeah.
Prescott probably should have been, but
fourth round.
yeah, I feel like there might have been one more, but
Oh,
I'm,
Paxton Lynch. He went.
yeah, they took him
He went in the first
late
round.
first round, right?
Yeah,
Yep.
late first round. Every once in a while, you get 3, and that third one can fall, but who knows? I mean, San Francisco is definitely going to need a quarterback, and they're high.
Cleveland does, even though
Cleveland
they don't
does.
seem like the type to do it, given their money ball approach.
Yeah, Moneyball approach. We'll see what they do with RG3 too.
Chicago, I mean, the Bears, the Jags, both those teams could end up deciding, hey, we need a quarterback.
Barkley fell off a lot after a pretty good.
He did. Yeah.
All sorts of quarterbacks fall off after playing us.
Well, he
Yeah,
had a couple good games even after that. He looked good even after that for a couple games.
So many picks down the stretch. I feel like every time I would turn around down on the little Sunday ticket, the little pop up at the bottom would say interception for him. But yeah. All right. Well then, what about free agency, guys? Like you said, Scotty, we're gonna have a ton of money to be able to spend there, and everybody wants to talk about Eric Berry. We don't even know for sure if the Chiefs are going to let him get away. They've got some cap situations they need to sort through. I'd be stunned if they don't re-sign that guy, given just how he's the heart and soul of that defense. But if he does, obviously you'd want him. After that, there could be, I don't know how much there's going to be at corners, and we're still way early on this, so we'll do, like I said, more in depth as we go along. But let's just kind of look at it from the perspective of, Scotty, where do you think we'd be better off to target some veteran guys rather than looking to draft young guys? I think one you mentioned already would be slot wide receiver. Rather than drafting young guy there, you probably want a veteran there to replace Kendall Wright.
I think Robinson will probably do what he did last year. You know, he got a center, and he filled in some spots. I would expect him to like sign maybe one big free agent cornerback, maybe, and I do think the good news about the defense is they can invest in it like they did the offense last year and make a pretty big leap in terms of upgrading the defense. I would expect them to go after a cornerback or two, and maybe Eric Berry, obviously, if he's available. I mean, it's hard to believe, like you said, they'd let him go.
Yeah.
But
what about
a
slot wide receiver, though? You think they need to go for a veteran there?
Yeah, those guys are pretty easy to find. I mean, guys like Dallas, Cole Beasley, and Amendola for the Patriots. And
I don't think it'll be too hard to improve on Kendall Wright. They just question on how they want to do it.
Right. Yeah. I don't even know who played the most snaps. I'd be interested to know who played the most snaps at slot receiver this year. It could have been Douglas. I don't even
know. Could have been
know.
running back for how our offense was run.
Or a tight end.
Yeah. No, for the year, because Kendall missed so much at the beginning, could be Douglas. That's an interesting question.
Either way, that's the type of guy I expect Robinson to go after. They need depth at I think Jamal mentioned it earlier. They really need a tight end worse than they need a wide receiver.
Yeah, there's just something uneasy for me. I don't know what it is. I feel like far too often this year with Delaney, we've talked about, that's an uncharacteristic drop, or that's an uncharacteristic play for him to make. And he's still had a great season. Obviously, he's a Pro Bowler again this year, but he's getting up there, and it's something he blocks a lot, and he's a guy that's very, tight end. He's a very physical runner when he has the ball in his hands. I don't think you can count on him to be as good this next year, especially the way where he's getting up there in age.
I actually heard him on his show last week, and they asked him about the difference in catches last year and this year, and I thought he made a really good point. In 2015, they're getting blown out in every game, and he's pretty much the only pass catching option, and he just piled up a bunch of junk stats. And so I don't think
that's basically what he said.
Yes,
That's funny.
I don't think the drop off in yards and receptions is that much. He still looks explosive, and he did drop too many passes down the stretch, but he's still explosive. And I heard a lot of defensive coordinators down the stretch. I think Wade Phillips said it. He's 32 years old, and he's still as fast as he was when he was 26.
He is very fast for a tight end. The Packers game still stands out in my mind, is him just dominating those guys on that one pass. But all right, let's see here. What else we got? So end of year wrap up here, preview of next year. What about coaching changes in terms of assistants? Everybody will be always looking to LeBeau. I mean, at his age, he could walk away at any point, and I don't think anyone would be surprised. But it seems like he wants to coach another year, and he seems to be in good health. And I think every time they ask him in an interview, he basically says, until I just can't do it, I'm going to keep doing it because he enjoys it so much. So I think he's probably back. The special teams job, of course, that one, Bobby April was fired early in the year. Remains to be seen. I think the guy's named Hoffman. Remains to be seen if he will keep that job long term. I think most of the core coaching staff, though, Jamal, you made a great point. I think it was you anyway, who said how
it was a great point. It probably was.
When Malarkey put this staff together, a lot of them were guys who aren't necessarily looking for that next leap. They're older guys. They're not really looking to go somewhere else. And you look at guys like Russ Grimm, you look at Terry Robisky. I mean, these are guys who've been in the league a long time. I don't think any of them would jump ship. Maybe a young guy like Jason Michael gets poached for a promotion. Maybe somebody looks at him for offensive coordinator. He did do that for us for a time. But for the most part, I think this coaching staff will stay pretty intact, which is good considering what we've seen in terms of turnover the past couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, he mentioned it at the time. What'd you say, Scotty?
I don't expect any changes of note.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, nothing meaningful, I don't think, because he mentioned it at the time that this was the first time that, the main guys he wanted were all available and they all said yes. And then you look at the season and I'm sure he's not looking at 9-7 and disappointed. So I would suspect that he'd look at it, and unless he had any personality issues with people throughout the year that were unexpected, I wouldn't expect really any changes almost.
Yeah. All right. Well, as we move towards the end here, I think we'll close out our final episode for a while. I'm sure we'll do stuff around free agency and the draft, but this is probably it for a while anyway. And let's just close it out with kind of your expectations for this team in the year 2017. And if people visit Titans Report frequently, they've probably read a lot of our comments already. But if they don't, for me, I think next year is playoffs or bust for this team. And of course, the caveat being we recognize injuries can happen and throw all kinds of things off during a year. But just given where we're at now, given the cap space, given the draft capital they have just in terms of quality picks, and the fact that they very well seem to have found their quarterback, I think you absolutely have to go into next season with playoffs 100% as the expectation. And barring injuries, really anything less than that's going to be a pretty big disappointment for me, given the progress we saw in just 1 year.
Well, I obviously expect them to make the playoffs next year, but I think really you have to look at a bigger picture. I mean, it's hard to get to the Super Bowl. It's hard to win championships and all that stuff. And that's really, when you have a quarterback like Mariota, that's really what you want to do. I think you have to hope that they're in contention over the next several years and they build a roster and make the right decisions that just make them a contender. Anything can happen next year. They can, have a much harder schedule. They can have injuries, like you said. So, playoffs or bust. I know you said with the injury and stuff, that's a little too much for me. I just think you have to be in the position to contend. And I don't even want to see them make the playoffs next year. I want to see them where they make noise in the playoffs and be a threat. I think with the draft picks and this free, if you build a good defense, that's what they've got to do. They've got to build a good defense because the Texans have won the division back to back because they have a good defense, and that's typically who wins the Super Bowl.
They have a good defense, even though they lost J.J. Watt.
Yeah, because they have so many good front seven players and they have good coverage people. If you build a defense that can also cover up if Mariota has a bad game, he doesn't have to win the game.
Yeah, that's huge.
He had to play good in the games that they lost, and when he didn't, they lost because the defense couldn't keep the other team to like 13 points or whatever. So my expectations are for the next however long that they're in contention to win a championship.
Yeah, I'd have to generally agree with you guys, but I do think fans can be unreasonable with expectations. I think this year we're ahead of schedule, and that feels really good. But then I don't think you should take this now as the baseline and say if we're worse than 9-7 next year, it's a failed season. I mean, we did have an easy schedule. We did have few injuries. We did have a lot of things just kind of go our way. We could be a better team next year and like play better and finish 7-9. Like some things can just not go your way. And I would hope that there's some realism in terms of expectations. You'd want to see us competitive. You'd want to see us, making tweaks that are meaningful and whatever else. You want to feel like we can compete from now on. We're not going to expect to be a doormat, but we could take a slight step back in record, or our offense could be worse statistically. We were talking before the podcast about how the offense is like ranked 12th now in most stats. That's pretty good, especially considering where we were at previously. We could take a slight step back, and that's not necessarily a true step back for the team. I think we have to be somewhat realistic with expectations.
Yeah. And then, I mean, what I said about playoffs, you could be in a situation like the Texans are where they're making the playoffs, but it's really not meaningful in terms of long term, right? Because until they find a quarterback, they're probably not going to be able to go very far unless Tom Brady and Roethlisberger and just get injured and they can play injured quarterbacks the whole time. I just don't see them making it very far. Who knows? They may surprise us all. Tom Savage may just become amazing once the playoffs start. But yeah, it's. I think the whole kind of to put a cap on this year for the Titans, just the fact that we're even able to have this type of discussion to where, Scotty, you're talking about them not just being decent, but being able to compete once they get there, not being a team that people say, oh, well, they're in the AFC South, they got in the playoffs, and they're going to be an easy out. We want to be a team that's completely rebuilt and is competing year in and year out. And I mentioned it already about how young the guys are offensively and how a lot of those seem to be core building block players. I mean, the hardest positions to find on offense, we've got.
Exactly.
It's everything else that they're going to have to fill out. And we haven't talked about it much about special teams, but geez, if we just improved our special teams this year, that's worth at least one more win right there, if not two more wins, given how things kind of went down. But yeah, as we head into the off season, lots of focus will be on the defense. Some will be on special teams, and then some will be on the offense. But I think a lot of people are going to be talking about the defense, and I fully expect the Titans to be a trendy preseason pick next year to do big things. Obviously, a lot of people I think will pick us in the AFC South, barring something crazy unforeseen. And one thing we haven't talked about much is Mariota's injuries kind of hanging over all this. Everything seems to have been a success. He's already back at the facility with the guys. You hope that he doesn't suffer a setback because of that. And one other thing I posted, and I don't think we've ever talked about just kind of your guys' expectations for a quarterback in year 3. But I know for me personally, I mean, my my expectations really take a jump from year 2 to year 3. I mean, at this point, I'm expecting him not to have those backbreaking turnover games like we saw early on so consistently, to where it cost us the game against the Vikings and cost us the game against the Colts. I believe there was one too. I really have a much higher expectation on year 3 quarterbacks. And so there's the fact that he does have this injury that's kind of hanging over. And it's like, well, do you cut him a little bit of slack, considering we don't really know how much offseason work he's going to get at this point? So that's just another thing to keep an eye on. I don't know if you guys want to have a final thought on that or not, just in terms of your expectations on a year 3 QB combined with his injury.
I think you're right. Just more consistency and not as many low lows. But hey,
yeah,
after the first month of the season, his turnovers went way down.
Mm-hmm.
They did. Yep. And I think it was it like weeks 5 through 12 that, I mean, you go back and those, he was just putting up some astronomical numbers there.
Yeah, you'd want more consistency. I suspect that he's going to end up with more opportunity to lead the team as he gets better. And so you'd expect his passing numbers to come up, things like that. I'm interested to see what offense they run next year. And I don't necessarily want to bog the podcast down and getting into that discussion, but I would expect as he emerges, he gets a bigger role.
Well, a lot of people have talked about how that Mularkey could be following the Matt Ryan approach. And I thought it was crazy. Did you guys see that where I posted in Matt Ryan's second year, he had exactly the same number of attempts that Mariota did. I think Ryan actually missed 2 games, though. Mariota ended up just missing 1. But and then Matt Ryan had a huge jump in his third year. I don't know if we'll see that much of a jump, but it is something to keep an eye on in terms of how much more control do they give him next year, and how much do they tweak the offense. I mean, the system, I think, is largely going to be the same. They want to run the ball. We've talked a little bit already about how important the tight ends are going to be in this offense. But yeah, obviously you'd like to see them give him a little more control and for him to seize that opportunity and not have as many low lows, like you said, Scotty, because the highs are great, and towards the end of the year, he really did cut down on, or middle of the year through the end of the year, he really cut down on the low lows, and toward the end against the Texans, or not the Texans, but the Broncos. If you say that was a bad game, the Chiefs, he was up and down, but he didn't have those backbreaking turnovers. And even in the Jags game, I'm trying to blot that one from my memory, but did he have a turnover in that game?
No, but he probably should have had about 2 interceptions.
There were a couple iffy interceptions.
It was almost.
What about you, Scotty? Any final thoughts on that one?
It's funny that you mentioned that he'll be given more on his plate, but I think back to the first month of the season, and one of the complaints is a lot of people thought he had too much.
Was he having too much? Yeah, I remember that.
I just think it's funny how much it's, not necessarily you, but the narrative always changes depending on how the quarterback's doing or not doing or whatever. But he's definitely, it's going to expand. I mean, he's going to get better. He's going to have better weapons around him,
All right, guys. We thank you all, listeners, for listening to the podcast throughout 2016. We had some of our best numbers ever. So to all of you new listeners out there, thank you for tuning in. Hopefully you stick with us even though the end of the year didn't quite go how we all wanted it to. Still a great season for the Titans to finish at 9-7. And of course, lots and lots and lots of discussion remains to be had throughout the offseason in terms of everything we've kind of previewed here for you: free agency, the draft. And if you're new to the podcast, we don't do as frequently episodes, or as frequent, I guess would be the correct way of saying it, throughout the season or throughout the off season, but especially around the draft and especially around free agency, we'll definitely be getting some podcasts out there as well. And let's close it out with Super Bowl picks. Who do you guys got?
I will say New England and Atlanta.
That's my pick. I think Atlanta's finally going to get over the hump this year.
Those are the two best offenses. I was looking at this just a little bit ago. Did you guys know how good New England's defense was this year? It's ridiculous. They only allowed 250 points.
Yeah, but
most of the NFL teams are right around 400 points allowed, it seems like.
You think
it's number one, easily, points against New England.
You think the Titans had an easy schedule? Look at New England's.
They play in such a crappy division.
It ain't just that. Look at their quarterbacks they faced. The only good one they've played recently is Russell Wilson, and they easily beat him. So I'm not sure. I wouldn't be surprised if New England's defense ain't nearly as good as their numbers suggest.
Huh. That's interesting. So I think I would take Pittsburgh, to be honest, in the AFC. In the NFC, I'm just looking at the teams that made the playoffs. In the NFC, I think I'd go Dallas.
I mean, it's hard to Dallas.
I'm hoping we get the Falcons-Cowboys matchup because I think that'd be a great game.
That would be what
that'd
be the fourth time the Cowboys and Steelers played in the Super Bowl.
I just think the Falcons, man, I think that this is different from the years past when they do this so often. They get there and then just lay an egg in the playoffs. I think they get over the hump. And Matt Ryan,
he should be the MVP.
I think he should. Yeah, I think
he should be. The Falcons have the 7th best offense of all time. That's how good their offense is.
They've scored 540 points. New England has the number 2 offense. They've only scored 441.
I will say this about Atlanta, though. They're one of those teams that has a great offense, and their defense is not very good. And those teams always get knocked out.
That's true. Vic Beasley got hurt today, too. I don't know how bad it was, but
if he's out,
they're
hurt.
I cancel my pick. I haven't had a chance to see how bad it was. I think he's leading the NFL in sacks, or he was up there.
Seattle has too many injuries this year. I don't think they can do it again.
Oh, crap. My laptop's telling me I have 8 minutes remaining, and I'm not near an outlet. So I'm going to wrap this up here.
I would have to play a lot better to actually make it. And I was just going to say, by the way, that looks like, according to Twitter, Kendall Wright has said he wanted to thank Titans fans for 5 years of memories, fun ups and downs. So I think that confirms what everybody already knew. Potential never fulfilled. If you would learn to run a route, that might have helped.
Have fun with the $8.5 million you got.
He's going to light it up in New England next year. We all know it.
Hey, he might. He seriously might.
He's like, he could succeed in that offense. But other than that, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see where he signs, how much he gets. All right, guys. Thanks once again for, as I said, tuning in this year throughout all the episodes of the Two Tone Crew. We will be back for off-season episodes. You can find us on Twitter at Titans Report. We are also on Facebook, facebook.com/Titans Report. You can call and leave us a voicemail. That might be a fun off-season show if you guys leave a bunch of voicemails at 615-900-0282. 615-900-0282. Question, comment, whatever you want to leave there. Just try to keep it under a minute. Sometimes they get to be a little long, and it's hard to incorporate them in the show. But, yeah, feel free to send them there. Scotty, Jamal, thanks for all your time and effort throughout this year. I know this has been probably easily, I think, the most fun I've had doing the podcast this year, just because we actually had a competitive team for the first time in a very long time. So, goodbye to 2016, and hopefully we'll have some good things for the Titans in 2017.
I predict, by the way, Kendall Wright, reunite with the Hobbit.